You should be drafting Bijan Robinson over Breece Hall. At least that's what I think. But Vinnie disagrees. It's time to debate the toughest running back draft decisions on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. And I'm not doing this. I'm running a lot of fantasy, NFL, and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The NFL is back. MLB is in full swing. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we have a really fun episode for you today because we're going to go through the draft board, right? And pick out some tough running back decisions that you're going to have to make when you're sitting there doing your fantasy drafts. We're going to tell you which side we're on. Now, some of these decisions we're going to agree on, some we're going to differ on, and that's okay. And we're going to talk through it and say why we're picking one side over the other. This very first one that you're going, if you have an early pick in the first round, you're going to have to make this decision. Vinnie and I disagree on it already. Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson, both going as top 5 picks. I'm on the Bijan Robinson side, but Vinnie, you tell us why you would pick Breece Hall over Robinson.
All right. Here's my thinking on Breece Hall. He's going to be the centerpiece of the Jets offense, I think, because Aaron Rodgers, let's hope that his Achilles, whatever, it works out, then he can come back and at least make this offense competent. But keep in mind, Breece Hall was spectacular last year, and he showed that he had to hit a pretty high floor, even with really terrible quarterback play. So if he gets above average quarterback play, that's all we're looking from Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't have to be MVP form. He just has to make sure he feeds Breece Hall the ball relatively often after Garrett Wilson. Now, the Mike Williams injury, they're hopeful that he can be out there on the field in week 1, but this team is short on weapons, right? They need to get the ball in the hands of guys. I know they have different guys that they like that are young, Xavier Gibson and Malachi Corley and some of these dudes that could have an impact, right? But they're more complementary pieces. Breece Hall has to touch the ball a lot in the passing game. And I think that, to me, when I'm making this decision between him and Bijan Robinson, you have Braylon Allen, who looked pretty good, but I think Tyler Algier is a bigger threat to the workload of Bijan Robinson. I also think we talked about this monumental shift. The Falcons are going to go from run heavy to pass heavy, probably, with their offense with Kirk Cousins, given the nature of Zach Robinson, while the Jets are still going to kind of keep things in check, run the ball a little bit more. Again, I see this potentially being Aaron Jones 2019 again, where he's helping Rodgers quite a bit. This defense is playing well, and then he's getting nice volume. So really the only question comes down to who's going to get the scoring opportunities. I think Hall gets a little bit more volume than Robinson in the passing game. Robinson is probably going to be the more effective rusher. So that could maybe cut things there. But when we look at it overall, I do like Breece Hall having the bigger overall volume and a chance to score more touchdowns in his particular offense.
My thing with Breece Hall is I really like him. He's a little bit too boom or bust, though, for me. He has scored 12 or fewer points in 11 of 24 career games. That's nearly 50% of his games. He has 9 or fewer points in 38% of games. Like, Braylon Allen is also the backup for the Jets. He's been shining in camp. So maybe, like, I mean, he was a workhorse last year, right? Breece Hall, like, if he gets some of that taken away, that's a little bit worrisome. Now, I just think Bijan Robinson has this chance to be such an amazing, like a CMC type running back, and his new OC agrees, right? Zach Robinson, the new offensive coordinator for the Falcons, comes out and says that Bijan Robinson is going to be used like Christian McCaffrey. He said that he's such a talented player. He's going to play running back first and foremost. And then any way we can find creative ways to get him the ball, like the Niners do with Christian McCaffrey, is exactly how they're going to use him. Like, we know Arthur Smith just was an idiot last year, right? Like, he played Tyler Algier way too much. Bijan Robinson across the board was so much more efficient than Algier. as a rusher and as a receiver. Also, like as you mentioned, he gets a lot of receptions. That's going to continue with Kirk Cousins and in this offense. He's really good in that role. The issue is he had no carries around the goal line at all. He had 3 carries inside the opponent's 5-yard line last year. He scored on 2 of them, but like Arthur Smith refused to give him the ball around the goal line. That's not going to happen this year. And also, this offense should just have so many more scoring opportunities. I'm all in on Bijan Robinson. I also maybe would get crazy and draft him over Christian McCaffrey, but I don't think I'm bold enough to do that.
Yeah, I just think it really comes down to the receiving work and touchdowns. And again, some of these decisions are we want both of these players to succeed. And I can see your perspective. Bijan Robinson is the higher floor play. I think Breece Hall is the higher ceiling play. He might be more inconsistent. So it just also ultimately comes down to your decision as a drafter, how you feel comfortable. Do you like to swing for the fences? You might have Breece Hall go for 150 and 2 1 week. He might be 73 and no scores the next week, while Bijan Robinson might be 99 and 0, 100 and 0, but you're still getting the consistency right from him. So it really comes down to what type of drafter you are. And you have to know that, I think, when you approach drafts.
Now, if you're later in the first round, if you have a pick later in the first round, you might be staring at a decision to take either Jonathan Taylor or Jahmyr Gibbs. I am on the Jonathan Taylor side, Vinny. What side are you on?
Yeah, I might have leaned toward Jahmyr Gibbs, but I don't like preseason injuries. I don't care if the team brushes it off as something small. Hamstring, we know those things can linger, soft tissues. And we also know they have a very good running back there that could pick up the workload a little bit early, right? If Gibbs is slow out of the gate and he's not right by resting through the preseason, they might give it to David Montgomery. Now, that's not the only reason. I think David Montgomery is a big factor in this because Jonathan Taylor's backup situation is just a massive drop off in relation to what you're seeing with the Lions, where David Montgomery was very productive. We know he scored a lot and he was a very good, capable back. I know they wouldn't really increase Gibbs' workload, but this hamstring might say, hey, maybe we had the right mix last year, right? It worked out. We preserved him. He was really good in the playoffs. So I think it's going to be based on volume. And Jonathan Taylor, I love Shane Steichen. I think he can have a Miles Sanders-like year plus there with Jalen Hurts that we saw just a few years ago. I don't know if Richardson is going to run in the way that Jalen Hurts does as well. So the touchdowns are still going to be there in that Steichen offense for Jonathan Taylor. So I'm all in on Taylor. This hamstring injury just made it a little bit easier and more comfortable for me.
Yeah, I was, even if the hamstring injury didn't happen, I'd still lean the Taylor side. We've seen Jonathan Taylor finish as the RB1, and there's no reason not to believe that Taylor's going to get all the snaps and all the volume in this backfield. There's no one else to compete with him. I mean, last year there was Zach Moss, but he even ended up taking over that role again by the end of the year, right? It took a while for JT to get his role back, but weeks 9 through 18, he ranked 4th in fantasy points per game among running backs, only behind Kyron Williams, Christian McCaffrey, and your boy Breece Hall. But like, he can get it done. We know he can. No, he's not going to get a ton of receptions, but he's going to get all the goal line opportunity. He's going to get all the volume. And honestly, like, he could get a solid amount of receptions as well, because they're lacking those receivers right now with Josh Downs, especially getting injured. So I'm all in on the Jonathan Taylor side. Even Gibbs last year, like, he ended up playing way more snaps than David Montgomery when David Montgomery came back from injury. But so weeks 10 through 18, when they were playing together, Gibbs was dominating in snaps, but he still was averaging 14.9 points per game over the second half. That's really good. It put him at RB7 in points per game over that span between ETN and Breece Hall. But like, I don't know. I'm going with the Jonathan Taylor side, just way safer with volume.
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of pop quiz before we get into our break. Derrick Henry, how do you feel about Derrick Henry over either of these guys?
I'm going Jonathan Taylor over Derrick Henry. And I think I'd go Gibbs over Derrick Henry too, because of the receiving.
I think I totally agree with you. The receiving aspect is a big part of it. And I think that's where kind of the line is drawn, right, between the guys that are involved in the passing game to the guys that are more touchdown and power rushing dependent. So totally agree with you there. We will see if we agree on 6 more running back debates. That's right. We'll get into all of those here in our final 2 segments on the show. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I love sports. I love the fact that the NFL is back, and I'm glad it's not stopping now with preseason here. And the playoffs are gone, right, in other sports. MLB season, however, is in full swing, and we're going to get more games in the NFL. The sports will be sportsing like we want them to here soon. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going wherever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. That includes preseason NFL. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. FanDuel, get in the action now before NFL season. All right, Michelle, let's dive into 3 more debates. This is fun, and let's get into it right away. De'Von Achane over Isaiah Pacheco, or vice versa. What side do you have? One Dolphin in one corner, one Chief in the other corner.
Yeah, I think you might be surprised here. I'm going Achane over Pacheco. Now, earlier in the preseason, Achane was going way earlier in ADP, but it's been slowly like people are starting to get a little bit nervous about his role and the hyper efficiency he had last year. But now you can get him in the late second, early third round, right where Pacheco's going as well. He finished as the RB4 in fantasy points per game in his rookie season with very limited touches. Yes, he's going to become it cannot the efficiency he had last year is not gonna happen, right? Again, it's gonna come down, and we saw that come down last year. But at the same time, he had incredible games, 49 points, 25, 21, 23, 22 at 13 there at the end. He did go through a stretch of 3 games, not great. It's going to be a boomer bust season. It will, because he's splitting a backfield with Raheem Mostert, maybe even Jalen Wright. But at the same time, when he has those boom games, he's going to win you the week. Like, he has that opportunity. Pacheco doesn't really give you that. It's very, very rare Pacheco's going to win you the week. He was RB15 Pacheco last year in points per game. Like, he got 49 targets, sure, and they say like maybe those will increase. I don't know. He had no games with more than 20 carries, only 4 games with 16 carries. So it's not even like Pacheco is this like huge workhorse back. So I'm going with the high upside of Achane and over the kind of safe but boring Pacheco.
Yeah, this might surprise you, but maybe doesn't, because I had Breece Hall over Bijan Robinson. But I'm also going De'Von Achane. I do
That surprised me.
like, yeah, it does surprise everyone. Maybe Isaiah Pacheco, I'm a fan of, but again, I've already laid my cards out on the table. I like the upsides and the home runs here. And De'Von Achane is there now. I will also give you a sneaky piece of advice. I don't think you need to go get Raheem Mostert or try to lock up this backfield. What I would do is get Jalen Wright and make sure that you have the 2 big play running backs of this Miami offense, the home run hitters, the guys that can carry your team. I do like that fact. I mean, Isaiah Pacheco, you're right. I think he's going to be steady at times. Let's hope his receiving work goes up a little bit. His touchdowns stayed well as well, because, again, they don't have a lot of red zone finishers, and there's a lot of competition in the Chiefs backfield. But Achane is just so tempting, Michelle. It might be the wrong decision in the end, but he just feels so right. And again, get Jalen Wright behind him, because if something happens to Achane, Jalen Wright's a special runner, and he's going to be the guy that explodes, not Raheem Mostert, because they're going to put a cap on Mostert's value. I think they're just not going to force him in there too much. Keep in mind, Achane was hurt early in his rookie year and didn't get on the field as much with Mostert. Mostert's not going to score that many touchdowns again, and that's going to help Achane. Now, the next battle we have, this sounds like a breaking at the Olympics, but it's Rachaad White versus Josh Jacobs. So what side do you land on, Michelle?
This is really, really close for me. I think I lean on the Rachaad White side. So last year, it wasn't efficient. It started slow for Rachaad White, but from week 7 through 18, he was a running back 8 in points per game. Finished as a RB6 overall, but he played all 17 games, so that definitely helped him. I think his role here is safe. Bucky Irving is having good reviews. Maybe he gets in a little bit more than other running backs last year, but I still think White's receiving role is very, very safe. He was 3rd on the team in targets last year. They didn't add anybody. I still expect him to be 3rd in targets. He scored 9 touchdowns last year. I think that's repeatable. It's nothing like crazy. Maybe he can even get more. With Josh Jacobs, is just like, we know he can be great, but last year was kind of scary with the efficiency wise and just like the lack of effort. Maybe it was just the team he's on. Maybe he'll be more excited, but also AJ Dillon hype. Like, what is so much hype around AJ Dillon, but AJ Dillon every year gets at least 170 carries and he gets a lot of goal line work. I don't know if they're going to take away from Jacobs like they did from Aaron Jones, but it seems like it's going to happen again with AJ Dillon stealing work for no reason.
Yeah, and Jacob, I mean, has looked a little worn down since that big year where he led the league in rushing and scrimmage yards. So there's some concern there. They do have Marshawn Lloyd, who came up a little bit hurt here in the past week, but he should be okay. He's a very talented rookie, and you have two guys competing essentially. AJ Dillon, as much as people want to write off AJ Dillon or the Packers should dump him, they did bring him back when they didn't have to. So that might say something that there's some little things he does that Matt LaFleur likes in this offense that is going to keep him a bit loyal to his usage at some point. So Marshawn Lloyd is dynamic. Josh Jacobs is always the big injury risk. I'm going with Rachaad White easily in this one. And Michelle's right. The competition for White has not been all that impressive. He was actually better as the season went on. He was an efficient runner, but he was a very good receiver from the get-go. Not much has changed, except that you have a little bit different offensive scheme, but he's going to be a big part of it. And I think you'll see him score like he did in the playoffs. I think we'll see a little bit more of that. So Rachaad White is just scratching the surface here, being the Leonard Fournette part 2. I think he's going to have Leonard Fournette plus value for the Buccaneers going forward. Now, let's look at the other side. Jacobs, yeah, not into it at all. So Jacobs is one of my bust guys, so I have to go with Rachaad White. Now, this is one we haven't talked about too much yet, but it's an interesting decision as well. Kenneth Walker or Joe Mixon. Now, recent developments might lean us in one direction.
Now, we have been agreeing a lot. I think this means we talk to each other too much about fantasy football and have Joe Mixon was one of my bust candidates. I just don't feel great about Kenneth Walker either. The issue is both Joe Mixon is a better pass catcher, right? I think both are going to be very, very touchdown dependent. And that's why I'm going to lean on the Joe Mixon side over Kenneth Walker, because with both being so touchdown dependent, I like the Texans offense more than the Seahawks offense this year. I just like CJ Stroud more than Geno Smith. That's really what it comes down to, right? Now, maybe all those playmakers for the Texans take too many touchdowns away, but I still think they're going to have a lot of scoring opportunities. Joe Mixon is going to get those, and he'll still get some receptions. Kenneth Walker is just really not used in that area. In the 8 games that Walker scored 0 touchdowns last year, he averaged 6.8 fantasy points per game. That's hard to put into your lineup. They have a new head coach, OC. We don't know what the system's going to look like. Walker's being talked up in camp, though. Like, it doesn't seem like Zach Charbonnet is like going to be a thing at all to slow down Walker. But if I'm going to choose between these two, it's Joe Mixon.
Yeah, this is the worst decision. I'm going to tell you. I don't really want to make it, and I might just pass and take a wide receiver. But when I look at this, I think I'm going to lean with Joe Mixon as well. I think the touchdowns, I think you said it right. I mean, I trust this offense a lot more. I don't know what I'm going to get from Geno Smith in a new offense. I really don't. I know what I'm going to get CJ Stroud to do in this offense. And look, the receivers are great, but they're still going to be in position to score a lot more. And Mixon is a very efficient scorer. I mean, that's one thing he's really boosted his fantasy value on with the Bengals. So I think, to me, it is Joe Mixon over Kenneth Walker. It's not pretty, but it's where I'm leaning. Again, this might be where I'm going to be out a little bit. I would be a lot more excited to draft any of the other guys we talked about than either of these two guys.
Yeah, I think in this round, the 4th round, like if Rachaad White's not there because he's going in the 3rd, right? 4th round, maybe that's the round you avoid running that backs. That might be the dead zone where you're getting trapped into pretty bad running backs right there that aren't going to help you too much. Maybe take wide receivers there. Maybe that's the time to take a tight end. Maybe go early on a quarterback. Who knows? But I think I'm avoiding running backs at this spot. Now, in our last segment, I think this next debate that we're going to get into, I think we're going to differ here. I know we've been agreeing on a lot of them. I think we have it different here. We'll get into that to finish up the show. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. I personally use online therapy and benefited from it greatly over the last few years. It's helped me with my anxiety, irritability. It's taught me positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It really has empowered me to be the best version of myself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress because you could switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. With BetterHelp.com/locked on today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Okay, Vinny, we have two of your boys here. So maybe I'm just assuming that you're going to pick one, but I know you love Zamir White, but I'm going to put him up against Najee Harris because they're both going in the sixth
No,
round. Very, very close together. You're going to have to make this decision. I know you like both of them, but what way are you going when you are on draft day and you have to actually decide?
I think I have to go with Zamir White only because he probably has less competition for touches. Now, I think the Steelers' offense should be a lot better with the running game. They've done more with their offensive line, but keep in mind the Raiders have a pretty good offensive line as well. Colton Miller, a little bit banged up, but also is Jackson Powers Johnson. I really like him to improve their run blocking. I think they're underrated all around. I will say this. They're front five, and I think they're better run blockers, and it's Luke Getsy, who comes from the Bears, now running their offense. And we know the Bears had a very good run blocking scheme and helped their running backs last year, even though it was a split backfield with Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert and Dante Foreman. This one is not going to be that. Zamir White, again, look at the last 4 games. He was just awesome with high volume down the stretch. And Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, I think you have to at least respect this passing in because there are some weapons here. You're going to have to worry about Devontae Adams in coverage. They're going to have tight ends that you're going to have to worry about. And again, just enough where I think the Raiders will be competitive a little bit because of their defense. Their quarterback will be decent, not spectacular, but they're going to lean on Zamir White and the defense as Antonio Pierce. So I think his volume is going to be high. They trusted with him last year. Pierce was there, even though Getsy wasn't. Getsy is a little bit more run-oriented here than what they had last year. So I'm all in on Zamir White because, again, he's like Rachaad White of this year. He's the guy that's going to see most of the key touches on his team, and I don't see any competition for them.
So, I'm going with Najee Harris. I do think Zamir White can be a solid RB2, but I think that's his ceiling, right? Even last year when you said he had a great span when he made his 4 starts. I mean, nothing crazy, right? He had a ton of volume, finished at RB12, RB15, RB20, RB17. That's completely fine if he's your RB2.
Yeah.
Like, he's not killing you. He's also not helping you really win any weeks. He's just kind of steady. But you're taking him in the 6. So if you load it up on wide receivers early and not, or like Zamir White ends up being your RB2 or something like that, I think that's a solid pick. I just think Najee Harris has a higher ceiling in this offense. We've already seen him finish as an RB5 before. No, it was a couple years ago. But with Arthur Smith, the Falcons ran the second most rushing attempts per game last year. Now he was stupid with the way he used Bijan and Tyler Algier. Hopefully he doesn't make that decision, like wrong decisions this year. But I do expect this to be a very, very run heavy team. No running back has touched the ball more than Najee Harris since he got in the league in 2021. And also, like last year, once they had decent enough quarterback play from Mason Rudolph, Najee Harris started to take off, right? Averaged 24 carries per game, scored 4 rushing touchdowns then, was really, really solid during that span. I expect much better quarterback play this year. I'm not worried so much about Jaylen Warren. Like, he's a change of pace guy. He's really good in that role. But he cannot be more than that. And he has a fumbling issue. So I'm all in on Najee Harris in this new offense. They don't have the Steelers don't have the personnel to throw the ball that often. They can be very run heavy unless they end up trading for Brandon Ayuk in this 5-month-long trade debacle.
Yeah, we'll see if that happens. I still think they'll be run heavy based on Arthur Smith's history. And what you're going to see is a weird kind of role reversal of Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. Now, neither of these guys are as talented as Bijan Robinson. Let's get that out of the way. The next thing I will say is that Tyler Algier is more in that power role, that he could not get enough of Arthur Smith. So Najee Harris is more that type of runner, right? And Najee Harris can do a little bit of things better in the passing game as well. So I think Najee is going to get most of the work here. I think it's going to be very close. Again, a lot of these things maybe come down to receptions and touchdowns. And I think Zamir White's going to be just a little bit more involved in the passing game. And I see Harris probably scoring more. So it really comes down to who can get those yards to make up the difference.
Now we have another Steeler debate. Jaylen Warren. So the other running back with Najee, he's going in the 7th round, right next to Devin Singletary. Now Warren's expected to be, heavy split with Najee Harris at best. And then Devin Singletary, I mean, he's like the last man standing for the Giants, right? He should get all the volume. Now are you worried about the Giants offense, right? Because I think Devin Singletary is a very solid running back. So that's the side I'm going to go on because I brought up Jaylen Warren. I think he's just a change of pace guy. I don't expect him to put up a ton of points this year. With Devin Singletary, he's going to get all the volume in this Giants offense. The one guy, Tyrone Tracy, who looked like maybe he'd be involved, he suffered an ankle injury. We'll see how long he's out. It's not as bad as expected when it first happened. But Singletary, he finally got to take over the Texans' workload last year in week 10. And then from weeks 10 through 18, he averaged 13.2 points per game, was a running back 17 during that span. Nothing super exciting, but he's going to get the workload. He's going to get the volume. And I do think like this offense is being overlooked a bit because I do believe Malik Neighbors will help this offense be so much better. He's going to help Daniel Jones be so much better. There should be more scoring opportunities than there has been for the Giants in a very long time. And I do think Devin Singletary is a very solid running back. He's not a great pass catcher, but Daniel Jones loves passing to the running back. So maybe he just kind of forces it to happen. And there's he's not a big guy either for the goal line, but who else is going to do it? Maybe that's why you just love Daniel Jones in fantasy. Maybe he gets it all, but I'm going with the Singletary side here. It's not exciting, but that's the side I'm going with.
Yeah, there's two sides of this coin with Singletary. Tyrone Tracy being out of the mix is important because he was a converted wide receiver in college and ended up at Purdue as a running back. So he had very good receiving skills. So if he's out of the mix for a while, they're going to have to replace that. Now, Eric Gray did score 2 touchdowns, by the way, in the first preseason game. That doesn't mean too much. He was behind Saquon Barkley last year and really didn't carve out a role as a key backup. So I wouldn't worry too much about him. Yeah, I lean Singletary too as well. I think the Giants are going to run him often. Keep in mind he has history with Brian Dable going back to the Bills, so he likes him. There's a reason they quickly got him as the rebound. If you watch any of the Hard Knocks, the Giants, Joe Shane and Brian Dable were excited to get him as a cheap replacement here for Saquon Barkley. So, yeah, he'll see a good workload. He's not going to be spectacular, but we're talking about RB2s, borderline flex plays at this stage. Now, speaking of flex plays, this is a good note to end on. This one is going to keep me up at night. I mean, thanks for ending on this one, Michelle. Tyjae Spears versus Chase Brown. They're almost the same dude. They're like a change of pace guy in the Bengals offense, and the Bengals offense kind of carries over right now to Tennessee with Brian Callahan. So what do we think about, again, Tony Pollard, Zach Moss, and then where do you feel those guys' values kind of affect Spears and Brown? I think you might have the expected answer for me.
Yeah, I'm going Spears because I think he's the better talent, and that's just straight up, right? They're both, I think, I don't think Spears is even a backup. I think it's going to be a strong 50-50 split. We saw that in the first season game in the first, when Will Levis and the starters were out there. It is going back and forth between Pollard and Spears. Chase Brown, he's going to get on the field probably 40% of the snaps. I could see Spears playing more than that, but I just think Spears is a much better talent than Chase Brown is. My biggest thing with Chase Brown is that he stinks. I don't know why people love him so much. He had 44 carries last year, averaged just 4.1 yards per carry while having a 31-yard run and a 27-yard run. That means Chase Brown averaged 2.9 yards per carry on 42 of his 44 carries. He was stuffed 20.5% of the time last year. That means he got stopped at the line of scrimmage or lost yards. That was the worst rate among all players that had 40 carries last year, 40 plus carries last year. And then he was stuffed twice on his 5 carries this past weekend in the preseason game. I recorded negative 14 yards over expectations in the first preseason game per Next Gen Stats. Like, he's not good. And he never played more than 18 snaps in any game last year. He only got 1 single carry inside the 10-yard line, 0 carries inside the 5 last year. I'm going with Spears because he's actually a good player, and Chase Brown's not.
Yeah, I like some aspects of Chase Brown and his usage. I'll just say that. But the usage, the idea has been much better than the execution of Chase Brown. So I think we're looking
You
at
see the
maybe
one
too
play
much.
where he just bounced to the outside
Yeah,
for no
yeah,
reason whatsoever and
yeah.
lost
He
yards.
gets, he just has a flash that some people are attracted to the way he runs because he can hit home runs. But then if he gets stuffed all the time, I mean, we're not talking about Barry Sanders losing -3 yards and rolling off 25 yards. That's not Chase Brown for me. Tajay Spears, however, what I like, he's been consistently involved, and he's a good Swiss Army knife. I think he can do everything. I think he's a little bit underrated as just a straight up runner. He can catch passes. And I think this backfield is going to be split well for a change. Like, I think we were torn on what was going on between him and Tony Pollard, but I think this team with Callahan can use both players very effectively here. And keep in mind, DeAndre Hopkins is hurt. They're going to need another pass catcher here. We don't know if Chica Conquest's role is going to be huge. I think Calvin Ridley clearly be the top target for Will Levis, but something tells me we're going to really like this Titans offense, and it's going to be a breakout offense. So I want an attachment to that. And we also can't diss Michelle's podcast favorite, Zach Moss. He
Yes,
still exists. Zach
exactly.
Moss is a bigger threat, much bigger threat to Chase Brown, where I think when you look at Tajay Spears and Pollard, they might be equal, but this might be a very dynamic offense where there's a lot of points, a lot of catches, a lot of things to go around that we didn't have in previous Titans offenses.
Yep. And it was good to see Spears in there near the goal line in the first preseason game. Both got their chances, but it's good to see that they're giving Spears that chance as well. That is it for today's episode. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers. We're going to be back tomorrow doing the same thing, but with wide receivers. So debating the hardest, toughest wide receiver decisions when you're in your fantasy drafts. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.